So, hello everyone. I'm Maria Bartel. I'm professor of transnational private law here at the University of Amsterdam and one of the proud members of the Sustainable Global Economic Law. So I'm very glad to welcome today with us Professor Nedelsky, Jenny, in this SGEL lecture. This is the second time that Professor Nedelsky is joining us in Amsterdam, and today she's going to present her new book, Care Manifesto. Now, given how influential and varied career of Professor Nedelsky has been and still is, I will spend first a couple of words to place her contribution that he will share with us, that she will share with us today, a little bit in a longer line of other, I would say, decisive, important intellectual interventions that she has made over years. To start, institutionally, Professor Nedelsky has been based in Toronto University first, and a couple of years ago, she has moved to Osgoode Law School. Her work spans over feminist theory, legal theory, constitutional theory, constitutional history and interpretation, and comparative law and constitutionalism. I think that Professor Nedelsky, Jenny, has launched her star academic career with a book on property, in fact. So I guess interesting also for the colleagues from Amsterdam Center for Transformative Private Law, which was titled Private Property and the Limits of American Constitutionalism. So in this book, Jenny unpacks how the focus on private property has actually shaped, without being recognized as such, the whole body of US Constitution. I think still today, I know that Jenny returns to the questions of property, and I've also seen her recent chapter on relational theory of property in a recently published handbook of property. So the second major intervention, I think, is in law and legal discourse, at least, was her 2011 book, Law's Relations, a relational theory of self, autonomy, and law, which I think is, and this is, I don't think, a very controversial statement, is one of the core readings, the canon, so to say, for all interested in working on relational theory of law. I personally have met and had pleasure to meet and work with Jenny in the project called A Global Political Economy of Care. And I think that her current book is the culmination of her work on care as a new vector around which we need to shape not only our economy, but our society. So I very much look forward to the presentation, and I will now give floor to Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here with this audience. When I finished the book, I started to get very interested in issues of sustainability and the environment and rethinking the role of property. And I thought, well, now will I be having to leave care behind? But increasingly, I saw the role of care as absolutely essential. The revaluing of care is as important to our thinking, our relationship to the earth, as it is to gender justice or the economy. So I'm glad to have this diverse audience here, and I look forward to your comments. So I want to begin with a few comments from the preface to the book. I'm just going to read those. One of the most important insights I got from having my children was the importance of routine physical caretaking for the basic bonds of human connection. That initial insight broadened into a belief that physical caretaking is part of what roots us in the world and permits us to feel a connection with the material foundations of life, from the care the earth requires to the respect for the labor that permits us to live as we do. The dominant culture of North America treats virtually all forms of physical caretaking with contempt. Until there is a shift in this basic stance, those who do the caretaking will be treated with contempt. They will be paid little and defined as unsuccessful. If caretaking were actually valued, there would be a revolution in the structure of our society. So I wrote those sentences in 1998. And now, together with Tom Malleson, I offer a path to that transformation that I was hoping for those many years ago. This book is about new norms that could restructure our lives so that everyone, no matter how important their work, experiences the joy and connection of care, both physical and emotional. The norm would be that all those who are able provide roughly 20 to 25 hours of unpaid care every week, an amount sufficient for them to acquire the knowledge and connection that care brings. We use as a definition by Evelyn Glenn, caring can be defined most simply as the relationships and activities involved in maintaining people on a daily basis and intergenerationally. And we add that we mean the kinds of care that actually builds bonds of human relationships. So there are kinds of care like industrial care in a hospital, which we don't call as care for our purposes here, which is the requirement to provide unpaid care. The need to learn from care grounds our argument that everyone needs to do it. In addition, no one should work more than the upper limit of 30 hours a week of paid work. We think these profound changes could have vitally important impacts, ending the unsustainable stress on families and the gross inequality for those who do provide care. It would ensure that high-level decision makers know something about care, and those who do know something about care could become policymakers. And this, what we refer to as the care policy divide, is especially important because even if caregivers were respected and well compensated and possibly well paid, provided by the government, as long as one group of people makes the policy in corporations and governments and a different group does the care, we'll continue to have dangerously ignorant policymakers. Part-time for all could end the long-standing degradation of care and those who do it, as well as the policy distortions that flow from failing to recognize the value of care. As we were completing the book, the global pandemic struck, and COVID-19 has made it brutally obvious that people cannot get their work done unless someone is available to provide the care. When schools and daycares close, it becomes hard to ignore the fact that the economy and our society more generally depend on people providing care for those who need it, and not just children, of course. COVID-19 helped people see that women and the less well-off disproportionately bear this responsibility. The pandemic should have made it impossible to ignore the fact that both the benefits and burdens of care, given and received, are extremely unevenly distributed. The pandemic did show how painful it can be when those we love are not receiving adequate care, such as elderly people isolated from loved ones in inadequate care homes. Given all this, there's no better time than now to pose the fundamental question: what happens to care when the demands of the workplace ignore the need for care? Getting people back to work as we knew it will, of course, not address this vital question. Work relies on care, but care is becoming unsustainable because of the structure of work and the ongoing failure to value care. Who is supposed to provide care for those who need it when the ideal worker is still someone whose top priority is work? Of course, many workers, disproportionately women, have to provide care on top of their work hours. And increasingly, someone outside the family, usually female, often racialized or an immigrant, is paid badly to do at least some of the care. Men in heterosexual couples are helping a little more than they used to, but doing nowhere near 50% of the care. Better publicly funded care for children, the elderly, and people with disabilities is urgently needed, but it will not solve the underlying problems of workplace demands that are incompatible with care responsibilities and a pervasive degradation of care and those who do it. Almost all scholars who study care have concluded that there's a crisis in care. Even in rich countries, there's not adequate provision of care for all, especially among the poor. Children, the elderly, people with disabilities or mental health problems are not receiving the care they need. Even Nordic countries have not made adequate provision either for their immigrants or for the coming wave of elderly needing care. We are not just interested, however, in the unfair distribution of care for those who need it and of the burdens of care for those who do it, but rather for the uneven distribution of the benefits of care. By providing care, people learn important skills, acquire important knowledge about both the significance of care and its demands, and build the vital relationships that are the heart of a thriving life. Under our current system, the most successful and important people are actually excluded from these benefits. This book presents the argument that the problems of care, its low status and its unequal distribution, cannot be fixed without changing the structure of work. It's been interesting to me as I do these talks, I find I have two different audiences normally. There's the work audience and there's the care audience. And first of all, they're gendered very differently. They ask different kinds of questions, and part of our project is to bring these two things together. By reducing work hours across the board, with no exceptions for important jobs at the top, individuals, families, and societies will reap the benefits of a revaluation of care and of a population, a whole population, who has learned the joys, the skills, and the dispositions of care by doing it. Now I'm going to turn to the actual proposal in a moment, but before I do so, I want to just note a deep puzzle that I think underlies the whole issue of the devaluation of care. At one level, everyone knows that care is necessary for human life and thriving. Most people have had some experience of having a loved one rely on paid care, and they know how important it is that care is provided skillfully and compassionately. Despite the myth that care requires no skill, anyone who's actually observed it knows otherwise. People know how scary it can be if the caregiver is incompetent or indifferent, and yet, as a society, we denigrate care and those who do it. Everyone knows that caregivers are paid badly when paid at all and drawn from marginalized groups. So the question is, the puzzle is, why do we entrust this vital role of caring to those that we treat as at the bottom of society? Why do the powerful think it is beneath them and hold on to norms that ensure that no one will ask them to provide care because they are too busy and important? So I like to hold that puzzle in question as we think about these alternatives. Okay, so the summary of the book. Although there are many issues that confront contemporary societies, our book is focused on 4 specific but interlocking problems. All of them are connected to the core value of revaluing care. The first is that of stressed families, in other words, the unsustainable structure of work and family life that puts enormous stress on families and forces many people, particularly women, into untenable choices between work and family. And I should say that we see family as an evolving form. And we think that our approach will facilitate the multiplicity of family forms and provide relief in all of them. A second major problem is that of inequality. The provision of care is organized along hierarchical lines. The most obvious category around which care is organized is, of course, gender. Yet today it's increasingly obvious that gender intersects with other categories such as race, class, and citizenship status. In contrast, those on the top, rich white men, do very little care. Our key point is that as long as care remains stigmatized, as long as powerful men do very little of it, and poor women do the bulk of it, society will continue to be profoundly unequal in terms of status and economic well-being. In short, even if you're not particularly interested in gender inequality or care, if all you care about is equality, equality is impossible. You cannot create an equal society when you organize care around hierarchy and inequality. A third problem is, as I said earlier, what we refer to as the care policy divide. Those in top policy-making positions in government or business are almost always people with very little experience of the demands, satisfactions, or importance of caregiving. This means that policymakers are, for the most part, ignorant of a core dimension of human life. This renders them quite simply unfit for the job. We should no more consider electing someone without substantial experience in caregiving to public office or appointing them CEO of a corporation than we would appoint someone who had never held a job. Our claim is that knowledge of care is essential to good policymaking, and the necessary knowledge can only be acquired by doing substantial amounts of hands-on caregiving. Talking to your mother, reading reports, even reading novels might all be helpful, but they're insufficient. Many solutions offered to the care crisis, such as excellent affordable daycare or wages for housework, would do nothing to fix the care policy divide. Those on top, who might include women, would remain care-free and care-ignorant, at great cost to good governance. And those who do it would remain demeaned. The final problem, which intersects with all of the above, is that of time scarcity. I assume you all know what I'm referring to, but across the OECD, 17% of men work over 50 hours a week. In Europe, the average woman in a couple with children works a massive 71 hours a week when you include her unpaid care work. Now, the roots of these four problems are clearly complex, and we spend a lot of time in the book talking about them, but there are two fundamental causes. The first is the dominant norms of who is expected to do care and who gets a pass, that's Joan Trano's word, from this basic human responsibility. The second is the economic system, which particularly in the neoliberal countries generates widespread economic insecurity. The only real path to economic security in those countries is becoming an ideal worker. And that is someone willing to work full-time and who can displace family and care obligations to the margins of their life or onto the shoulders of others. Our book is aimed at the kind of fundamental change that could actually address these deep systemic problems at their roots. Our proposal is part-time for all. In essence, our proposal is that we need a dramatic change in the dominant norms of who does care work. And second, we need a complementary set of changes to our workplaces in order to foster and facilitate a more equitable distribution of care. So let me say a few words about both sides of the proposal. We think the heart of the problem must be new norms that everyone is responsible for providing care. Our proposal is that all capable adults should be expected to perform significant amounts of care, say 20 to 25 hours a week, unpaid care. No matter who you are, how important your work is, even if you're a preeminent surgeon, a star athlete, or a senior executive, everyone should be doing substantial care. And likewise, everyone should work part-time, that is less than 30 hours a week. Our argument is that practically everyone is capable of learning how to provide decent quality care, just like we expect everyone to be able to learn to be a parent if that's what they want to do. And moreover, everyone needs to experience substantial amount of care work in order to reap the benefits that come from it. As with the current gender norms, people would feel some pressure to conform. But these norms are not laws. There would be no bureaucracy to define and measure care. No one would go to jail for working more than 30 hours a week, nor be fined for failing to change their fair share of diapers. Though, of course, every society would need laws to facilitate these transformations, but the core norms are norms, not laws. One other distinctive feature of our plan is that responsibility for care is lifelong. We picture it as starting around the age of 3 and continuing late into life. And we expect these new norms to generate a lot more creativity about how the elderly and very young and people with physical and mental limitations can all contribute to care. Everyone will recognize that they both need care and provide care for most of their lives. We won't have two separate categories, those who are in need of care and those who aren't, we all are, and those who provide care and those who don't, we all do. When the demands of immediate family and friends recede, your parents aren't elderly, your kids aren't young, your friends are healthy, then we expect people to join communities of care, where they will carry on these care contributions. And those might be by neighborhood, faith groups, sports groups, theater groups, chosen relatively small communities of care who make serious long-term commitments of mutual care. Now, for part-time for all to be feasible, the central economic requirement is that everyone has access to good part-time jobs. By this we mean jobs that are secure, flexible, and high quality. High quality meaning that they provide pay and benefits that are proportional to what is now traditional full-time work in good jobs. In particular, for part-time work to be at all attractive to people, it needs to be reinforced by economic security. A core ingredient of our proposal is that even on a minimum wage, At 30 hours a week, everyone needs to be able to earn a living wage. That is, we need to define a living wage as what will support a person and a child on 30 hours a week. Other paths to economic security are guaranteed annual income, excellent social services, which would reduce what is needed for a living wage. We don't try to propose one path to economic security. We just need, because we think they will vary politically across different countries, what's feasible, but there has to be some form of economic security. And increasingly, it's becoming obvious that for this to take off, we need a solution to the worldwide housing crisis. But that is beyond the scope of this book. And unfortunately, none of these things exist in the current US or in much of the Anglo world. There, part-time for all is typically inferior, unattractive work that pays proportionally less than full-time work, provides fewer benefits, and offers fewer opportunities for career advancement. And across neoliberal countries, insecurity, economic insecurity, is endemic. A single mother in New York City, for example, working 30 hours per week at a minimum wage job will earn only about $19,000 a year. And that's in brutal contrast to a living wage, which for such a person is more than 3 times greater at around $71,000. So although part-time for all is not currently feasible in the US, the kinds of economic structures that it requires are not at all utopian. Many of the elements, as you probably know, already exist in various countries, particularly in Western Northern Europe. In fact, we use the Netherlands as an example of a part-time economy where part-time jobs are decent jobs, they're not denigrated. But of course, the uptake of gendered work, of part-time work, remains highly gendered. And I must say, I'm curious in our conversations to know how this works in the academy. In North America, where the academy should be an obvious place for facilitating part-time work, it rarely exists for high-level research positions with tenure-track positions. That's why I left the U of T and went to Osgoode, who was willing to create a part-time job for me, but that turned out not to be without its complications. Similarly, a number of countries show that it's completely feasible to provide robust economic security, often because there's such good provision of social services, the actual living wage that is required is much lower. In short, we argue that a society of part-time for all could be viably built on 4 main pillars: quality part-time work, flexibility, or what we prefer to call time sovereignty, economic security, and care-friendly policies as transition patterns. Such a society does not exist anywhere in the world at the moment, but we demonstrate that each and every one of these components do. We know that each pillar is feasible and it already exists in some form, and we see no reason why the pillars could not be combined. This is the essential realism of the project. We're not advocating institutions that are unknown or untried. Rather, the task before us is to weave together the best practices that already exist in various parts of Western Europe as a coherent whole. This is, of course, no easy task. We do not want to minimize the obstacles, but if we can overcome the standard but very real political difficulties of electing care-friendly governments into office, part-time for all is an entirely practical project. It's institutionally sound, economically affordable, ecologically sustainable, and capable of withstanding the pressures of globalization. Now, I just want to briefly note 2 questions that very often come up, and we'll probably have a chance to talk about this more in the discussion. One of them is coercion. Isn't this a coercive structure? What if I want to work 70 hours a week? That's just what I like doing. Why would your norms make me an outlier if I decided to pursue that? And especially, why would I have to care if that's not what I want to do? But I'd like to remind everybody that aside from some of the very serious people on guaranteed annual income, almost no one asks the question, well, why should I work? You know, I'm really not that kind of person. I don't like anybody telling me what to do. I just shouldn't have to work. It should be an option. Why should I be coerced? So we have come as a norm to accept the coercion that everybody has to work who can, And yet this idea that everybody should care and everybody should work less looks like some, outrageously coercive intervention. And of course, there's also the issue of intrusion. So these set of norms would govern the internal structures within households. So we oppose the division of labor, that one person does the income earning and a different person does the caring. That might be seen as one of these private decisions. But of course, I remind you that over the last 30, 50 years, feminism has pointed to many forms of overt violence and coercion within the home, which has required intrusion into the private sphere in the name of equality and security. This is a normative intrusion, and I think it is essential in order to transform the already existing powerful social norms that govern life within households. Okay, and now I want to raise two further issues, which are just touched on briefly in the book itself. And that is that the first, although I should say that I did pause, I was almost done when COVID hit. And for whatever reason, that was the moment that made me decide that I needed to write a chapter on Care for the Earth, a section on Care for the Earth. And so that's what I want to talk just very briefly about now. This basic idea that everyone needs to care for one another because they have to learn what can only be learned by doing care also applies to the earth. To care for the earth. Unless people learn from providing hands-on care for the earth, such as gardening, people will never experience the ways the earth gives us care. That will be a meaningless concept. So the idea that there is a mutual responsibility to care for the earth in return for the care we receive will be unintelligible to people who have no actual experience of caring for the earth. As in human-to-human care, I believe we can only learn what we really need to know to change our whole relation to care and to our relationship to the planet. The only way to do that is to practically experience providing care to both one another and to the earth throughout our lives. The next point is related to the deep change in values that I think is necessary for a caring and sustainable society. The necessary restructuring of work will require a big reduction in hours, which will mean that most jobs need to be redefined. This is not just a matter of technical redefinition of what a job entails, although there'll be a great deal of that has to happen. The existing part-time jobs have to be disaggregated and to create multiple, either shared or part-time jobs one by one. We'll also need to redefine excellence and success. Right now, people see long hours, success, and excellence as tied together. This is a powerful nexus in our culture. This needs to be changed. And we're already seeing increasing experiments with reduced work hours and finding greater productivity. Real, sustained creativity does not come from constant, grueling hours. And what makes a successful life involves a lot more than one's paid work. We can no longer allow paid work to prevent everyone from participating in care. Now, here I do want to note that the distinction that this whole argument makes between work and care is ultimately arbitrary. Care involves work, and good work involves care for coworkers, for clients, for customers, for students, for oneself. The more these new norms are adopted, the more everyone will see the arbitrariness between the distinction of work and care and what counts as what in which category. Now, I think the high status of many jobs, like the ones most of us here have or hope to have, these jobs often involve long hours, and this exacerbates a more general issue. I think part of the way we're all trained to think that work is more important than care is that in our culture, the scope and impact of what we do is coded as what's important. So if we're a dean, we're more important, we have larger impact than if we're just a good teacher in a classroom, many different iterations of this. The larger your impact, the more important what you do is. But care is almost always small scale. And this means that in our culture, there is an inverse relation between scale and importance on the one hand, and intimate relations and care on the other. Most rich societies code success as being high up a hierarchy of power and impact as possible. And this almost always means doing very little direct care. And indeed, I think this is part of why some people are resistant to the proposal of part-time for all to limit paid work to a maximum of 30 hours a week, and not to let, a separate argument, which I haven't gone into here, even activism should not interfere with a core commitment of 22 hours a week of direct personal care. I think it looks to many people like too much important, high-impact work, or its excellence, would be sacrificed to the low-impact, small-scale care. But actually, I think most humans thrive best and learn what they need to know to support good values in their communities and to participate effectively and well collectively if they're regularly involved in both direct care and in activities at larger scales, where they can feel their contribution on a wider scale. Under our current structures of work and degradation of care, people are forced into a choice. Part-time for all would go a long way to redress that. But it should also put us on a path of deeper change, one necessary to address climate change and more generally good governance. I believe we need an overarching change in our stance toward life that connects the issues of scale, care, and relationship with the tasks of collective cooperation. The dominant picture of the busy, important person must give way to the forms of human interaction that are slow enough, reflective enough, relationally connected enough to foster not only clear creative thinking, but a stance of care and compassion toward one's coworkers and towards those who will be affected by one's decisions. So in conclusion, part-time for all, which can be advocated for right now, will lead us in that direction. Thanks.